The firing itself wasn't a slow burn. It was a sudden, aggressive flare-up that left a scorch mark on my entire week. One minute I was optimizing SQL queries, the next I was standing in front of Mr. Henderson, my boss, who looked less like a corporate executive and more like a melted wax figure of pure indignation. "Jake," he started, his voice a low, vibrating growl that always signaled an impending disaster. "I just saw the expense report for the third-floor vending machine. 3 Kit Kats. 3. That's excessive. And frankly, it demonstrates a complete lack of fiscal discipline. In this economy, we need lean, hungry, focused employees. You, sir, are clearly neither." I blinked. "Mr. Henderson, that was over 2 weeks. And my productivity metrics are literally the highest in the department." He slammed his hand on the mahogany desk, making the little decorative globe he kept tremble. "Metrics are illusions, Jake. Chocolate is the truth. You're getting complacent. You're getting soft. Effective immediately, your services are no longer required." I didn't fight it. The whole company knew Henderson was prone to these explosive, nonsensical, micro-tyrannical decisions. He once fired a receptionist for having too many cheerful scarves. I just nodded, collected my pathetic little box of desk tchotchkes, a stress ball, a novelty mug that said, "I'm silently correcting your grammar," and a single, petrified bagel, and walked out into the cold, indifferent afternoon sun. The relief was instantaneous. It was like peeling off a too-tight sweater on a humid day. Freedom. I pictured a week of uninterrupted video games and maybe finally attempting that sourdough starter I'd been putting off. I got into my beat-up car, threw the box onto the passenger seat, and was merging onto the main road, maybe 7 minutes from the office building, when my phone buzzed. A known number. I ignored it. Probably the automated survey from the coffee shop downstairs. It buzzed again. And then again relentlessly. Curiosity, as it always does, overcame principle. I swiped right, put it on speaker, and heard a sound I can only describe as a strangled, distressed dolphin. Hello." It was shaky, high-pitched. "This is Jake," I replied, trying to sound cool, like I wasn't still processing the shock of losing my income over a 3-pack of Kit Kats. "Jake? Oh God, Jake, it's me. It's Henderson." His voice was ragged, completely devoid of the bombastic bluster he'd used just minutes earlier. The change was so drastic it was jarring, like watching a lion suddenly turn into a whimpering chihuahua. I almost laughed. "Mr. Henderson? You just let me go. I'm afraid I'm off the clock. Enjoy the Kit Kats, I guess." No, Jake, you don't understand. This isn't about the candy." He was genuinely hyperventilating now, the sound crackling through my cheap car speakers. "I need you to turn the car around. Immediately. So, drop everything. I need you back here now." The sheer urgency in his voice was chilling, wiping the smug smile off my face. This wasn't a boss trying to save face. This was a man on the brink of absolute catastrophe. The mystery was potent. What could possibly have happened in the 7 minutes since I left? Did he realize he needed my SQL query optimization skills for some crucial last-minute report? Maybe he missed my petrified bagel. I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine still running. If you're reading this, drop a comment right now and tell me where and when you're watching this video. "Mr. Henderson, you have to tell me what this is about," I insisted, the adrenaline finally starting to pump. My freedom fantasy was crashing down, replaced by a cold knot of dread and obligation. I can't say it over the phone," he choked out, and I could swear I heard a faint, frantic scrabbling sound in the background, like a mouse desperately clawing its way out of a bucket. "It's enormous. It's the Aegis." The word Aegis was like a code. It wasn't just a database, it was the database. The heart of the company. It contained every single client record, every historical transaction, every confidential detail for the last decade of the company's existence. Losing Aegis meant shutting down the company. It meant corporate death. It was the only thing Henderson genuinely feared losing, more than his expensive suits or his silly little globe. "You mean the whole client database? What about it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, fully dreading the answer. Just get back here, Jake. Please. I'm begging you. The entire system is redlining. The whole world is crashing. I did something so stupid. I don't know what I did. The delete button, Jake, the delete button was right next to the... I'll explain everything when you get here. Just please drive back to the office. That last plea was what did it. The great, unbending Mr. Henderson, the man who believed weakness was a punishable offense, reduced to pleading. The image was too powerful to ignore. Plus, the sheer magnitude of the impending catastrophe was professionally irresistible. A deleted main client database? That was the kind of IT disaster you read about in cautionary tales. A part of my coder brain, the part that thrives on chaos and impossible puzzles, was suddenly wide awake and buzzing. My anger at the ridiculous firing was instantly replaced by a mix of morbid curiosity and professional duty. I gripped the steering wheel. The sun was dipping lower, casting long, distorted shadows of the highway guardrails. I put the car in drive, sighed, and made a U-turn. Goodbye, sourdough starter. Hello, corporate apocalypse. So, there I was, doing the ultimate corporate walk of shame, the boomerang return. 7 minutes after being unceremoniously dumped for being too soft on Kit Kats, I was screeching back into the same parking space, the stress ball already out of the box and in my hand. But as insane as the current situation felt, I needed to ground myself in how I ended up here in the first place, because the unfairness of the firing was central to my current emotional state, that cold, hard feeling of justice mixed with resentment. See, my employment under Mr. Henderson was basically a masterclass in absurdity, a textbook example of toxic management run wild. It wasn't just the Kit Kats. That was just the latest, most ridiculous example of his paranoia. Let me tell you about the clipboard incident. About 6 months prior, I was tasked with overseeing a major server migration. It was a high-stress, all-nighter kind of project. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 cans of whatever aggressively caffeinated energy drink was on sale. I came into the office at 5 a.m. to check on the final phase, clutching a worn-out clipboard where I'd been manually tracking the IP addresses. Henderson arrived early, he always did, just to patrol and make sure no one was loafing, and saw me staring intently at the clipboard, ticking off names. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how the migration was going. He just froze, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. "What is that?" he demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the clipboard. "It's just my manual checklist for the server migration, sir," I explained, already sensing the inevitable disaster. "A checklist?" he hissed, leaning in conspiratorially. "No, Jake. That is a list of grievances." He was dead serious. He thought I was using a physical clipboard, like some kind of corporate revolutionary, to meticulously document every single one of his managerial flaws, preparing for a hostile takeover or a detailed report to HR. He spent the next 2 hours interrogating me about who else was on the list, what my end goal was, and whether I had any communist leanings. The server migration almost failed because I was trying to convince my boss that a bunch of scribbled IP addresses were not a declaration of war. He even made me sign a document promising to only use digital documentation henceforth, arguing that physical paper was too opaque. That level of derangement was my normal. The Kit Kat firing, therefore, was just the natural conclusion of that kind of management. He didn't fire me because I was bad at my job. I was the best IT guy he had. He fired me because, in his mind, my 3 Kit Kats represented a deep moral decay, a future where I'd stop caring and start stealing his precious decorative paperclips. So, when his frantic, pathetic voice cracked over my phone line, begging for my help, the feeling wasn't pure anger. It was a heady mix of vindication and schadenfreude. The universe, I thought, works in mysterious, immediate ways. He threw me out over a snack, and 7 minutes later, his entire professional life was on fire. As I walked back through the revolving doors, my old colleague, Sarah from accounts, was walking out, clutching her bag with a bewildered look on her face. "Jake, what are you doing back? Did you forget your keys?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "Henderson called me back," I murmured, nodding toward his closed office door, which was usually left aggressively ajar to show off his power. The door being shut was the first sign something truly awful had happened. Oh, thank God, Sarah breathed, relief washing over her face. He's been having a meltdown. Security escorted everyone out of his direct vicinity. They said something about a digital wipeout. I don't know what it means, but I heard him scream the word Aegis, so loud I think the air conditioning unit rattled. Her words confirmed my worst suspicion. It wasn't a small bug. It wasn't a corrupted file. It was an extinction-level event. The whole building felt different, heavy, silent, and charged with invisible panic. Everyone who remained was moving with a terrible, slow purpose, like extras in a disaster movie who hadn't realized the monster was already inside the building. The closer I got to Henderson's office, the more the silence was replaced by a low, rhythmic sound. It was a distinct, high-pitched whining mixed with an erratic pounding, like a sad metronome trying to beat its way out of a drum. I stopped right in front of the mahogany door. I took a deep breath, trying to compartmentalize the rage and the satisfaction. I told myself, you are here as a professional. You are here to witness the collapse of an empire built on irrational fear of carbs. I didn't knock. I just turned the brass handle and walked in. The sight that greeted me was not Mr. Henderson, the powerful executive. It was a man completely undone. He was on his hands and knees beside his pristine, expensive desk, his tie completely undone and yanked to the side. He was not just crying. He was sobbing, huge, silent tears dripping onto the Persian rug. The rhythmic pounding sound was him gently, repeatedly banging his head against the solid wood of the pedestal beneath his desk. The weeping was the sound of the distressed dolphin I'd heard on the phone. The office computer monitor was blindingly bright, displaying a single, ominous, white screen with a tiny, blinking black cursor. The universal sign of a system that has been completely emptied, a vast digital nothingness. Mr. Henderson, I said softly, using the formal title one last time, what in God's name did you do? He flinched, recognizing my voice, and scrambled back, sitting up on his heels like a child caught red-handed with a broken heirloom. His face was blotchy, his hair disheveled, and the sight of the mighty man reduced to this pathetic state was profoundly disturbing. He didn't even try to reach for the usual tissues. He just pointed a shaking finger at the screen and whispered, the word barely audible, I deleted it, Jake. I deleted the whole thing. The immediate atmosphere in Mr. Henderson's office was a bizarre mix of corporate sterility and sheer, unadulterated panic. The expensive leather chairs, the pristine organization of his desk, everything screamed control, except for the crumpled, sobbing man on the floor and the silent, blinding white void of the computer screen. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the smell of fear and desperation thick in the air. My earlier feelings of vindication started to curdle into something else. A deep, almost professional curiosity mixed with a primal, self-preserving anxiety. I had walked back into the fire, and now I felt the heat. I deleted it, Henderson repeated, his voice still a rasp. He didn't sound like a man who'd made a mistake. He sounded like a man who had confessed to murder. The whole thing. The Aegis database. The one with everything. I took a few slow steps toward the screen, forcing my eyes to focus on the impossible emptiness. How, Mr. Henderson? That's not a single file. It's an enterprise-level system. It requires multiple confirmation prompts. You can't just poof it. He scrambled to his feet, pulling at his collar, his composure attempting a rapid, clumsy return. I was trying to clear out some old project files. Junk from that failed Q4 initiative. The Phoenix Rising folder. Remember that ridiculous name? It was cluttering my drive. I right-clicked it, and the menu was crowded. Jake, so crowded. I thought I was deleting that folder. But my hand slipped, or the mouse double-clicked, and then there was a window, and I just clicked, OK, out of habit. I massaged my temples, feeling a headache bloom behind my eyes. Mr. Henderson, Phoenix Rising, was a local folder. The Aegis database is on a secure network array, entirely separate from your local machine. You would have had to manually connect, navigate to the specific root directory, and authenticate with elevated privileges. I did. That's the problem, he wailed, throwing his hands up in a gesture of pure self-condemnation. I was prepping for the Cynosure group meeting. They want the full 10-year data pull, remember? I had logged in as an administrator, my personal admin account, not the shared one, because I wanted to show off how fast I could pull the numbers. I went into the main terminal, I opened the directory, I was running a quick optimization script, and then I saw the Phoenix Rising folder listed in the same damn window. I executed the rf command, but I pointed the directory path one level too high. My mouth went dry. That was the digital equivalent of accidentally pressing the self-destruct button for the entire facility. The rm command deletes. R means recursively, everything inside the folder, and F means forcefully, no confirmation needed. If he pointed that command at a high-level shared directory on the network drive, it would have mercilessly wiped everything in its path. And if he was in the Aegis root directory, he didn't just delete the client database, he essentially told the server to eat itself. You used the recursive delete command on the live production server as the administrator? I asked, the absurdity of the situation momentarily overriding my terror. Yes. And I didn't realize it until the terminal started scrolling lines of file not found, deleting, over and over again. I killed the process, Jake. I yanked the Ethernet cable right out of the wall. But I think it was too late. I tried to look for the system backups, but when I called IT, they couldn't even log into the main server array. His voice dropped to a barely audible mumble. They said it looks empty. This was catastrophic. This wasn't just losing data, this was losing the foundation of the company. The Aegis database was the legal record, the invoicing system, the intellectual property, and the client history rolled into one. Without it, the company was a ghost, a physical building with no memory. If the Cynosure Group, their biggest client, arrived and couldn't access their historical data, they would pull their contract. And if they pulled their contract, the company would fold within a month. Hey, don't move. Don't touch anything else, I commanded, the panic receding slightly, replaced by the cool, analytical focus of a crisis response technician. This was my expertise. I knew the Aegis structure better than anyone, even its architect, because I was the one who spent 8 hours a day optimizing its maddeningly complex queries. I walked over to the system tower hidden in the cabinet, observing the flashing status lights. They were all green, which meant the hardware was fine, but the network activity light was dim, a sign that the server had nothing to do because its contents were gone. Mr. Henderson, where are the nightly backup tapes? The off-site backups? I asked, already dreading the answer. He avoided my gaze, shuffling his feet. Well, the internal system runs a daily snapshot, but that's on the same array. That's gone too, right? Probably. The off-site tapes? The ones we cycle weekly? He wrung his hands. We stopped doing that about 3 months ago. Expense cuts. I told IT to just rely on the redundant array within the network. It was saving us $400 a month on data storage services. And there it was. The secondary challenge, the layer of conflict that deepened the engagement. It wasn't just that he deleted the data, it was that his own stinginess and paranoia, the same stinginess that led to my firing over Kit Kats, had removed the safety net. He didn't just fall, he also cut the rope. The only way to retrieve the data now wasn't through a simple restore command, it was through a deep, messy, low-level forensic recovery operation. I looked at the weeping man who had fired me minutes ago. The man who was now begging me to save him from financial ruin, a ruin he had brought upon himself through a deadly cocktail of arrogance and thriftiness. And I realized my price for helping him wasn't going to be cheap. The revelation that Mr. Henderson's own cost-cutting measures, the same mentality that saw 3 Kit Kats as a major financial threat, were responsible for eliminating the essential off-site backups was the ultimate, bitter cherry on top of this corporate disaster sundae. It solidified the fact that his ruin was entirely self-inflicted. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had systematically dismantled the safety protocols meant to protect against his mistakes. He was still pacing now, running his hands through his already messy hair, leaving faint oil streaks in the pristine white of his shirt collar. $400 a month, Jake. That's what? $4,800 a year. In recurring revenue, That's almost $50,000 we had to generate just to cover an insurance policy we never used. It was an efficiency move, he stammered, still trying to spin catastrophic negligence as efficiency. I stared at him, my expression unreadable. I had two distinct voices battling it out in my head. Voice 1, the professional get to work. The client data is paramount. This is a fascinating problem. Your colleagues need the company to survive, regardless of the idiot at the top. Voice 2, the petty, vindicated ex-employee let him burn. Walk out the door right now. Go home and enjoy your freedom. Call him back in an hour and ask how the sourdough starter is coming along. The silence stretched, heavy and judgmental, broken only by the whirring of the high-end server cooling fans. Henderson stopped pacing right in front of me, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked like a man who was about to lose his mansion, his yacht, and his entire identity. You're the best. I know what? I made a mistake this afternoon, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He couldn't bring himself to say, I was wrong, or I apologize. The best he could manage was a vague, generalized admission of error. The Kit Kats, the scarves, the clipboard, it was all stress. I was worried about the Cynosure Group. They are our entire Q1 revenue locked up in one meeting. If we fail this data presentation, we are talking about layoffs. Mass layoffs, Jake. Starting with Sarah, starting with accounts. Everyone. That was the key. He had shifted the stakes. It wasn't about his money anymore. It was about the dozens of people I actually liked. Sarah, who always brought me extra coffee. Dan in IT, who trusted me to fix his inevitable mistakes. They didn't deserve to lose their jobs because their boss used a recursive delete command like a drunken pirate wielding a sword. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. The satisfaction of watching him squirm was too powerful. This was my moment. I crossed my arms, leaned against his desk, a piece of furniture usually reserved for his elbows only, and sighed dramatically. Mr. Henderson, you asked me to come back. I was fired. Fired, sir. Over a vending machine purchase that you deemed a lack of fiscal discipline. You insulted my character and questioned my commitment to the company. 7 minutes later, you called me back because you, the great fiscal disciplinarian, performed an action that will cost this company millions and likely put everyone out of work. I paused, letting that sink in. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And you want my help. You want me to perform a high-level, extremely difficult forensic recovery, which, by the way, has a very low chance of success given the extent of the wipe, to save your skin, your reputation, and your corner office. I pushed off the desk, walking toward the server cabinet. Why should I, Mr. Henderson? What do I gain, except the knowledge that I saved the job of the man who just called me soft? He lunged forward, grabbing my arm, a truly desperate act as he never touched employees. Anything, Jake. Anything. Name your price. I stopped, looking directly into his desperate, watery eyes. This was the moment of leverage, the turning point of my career, no matter what happened next. A handshake and a thank you won't cut it, sir. Not this time. You want a raise? Double your old salary. Triple it. Whatever you want, you've got it, he pleaded, his voice cracking again. I shook my head slowly. Money is easy to promise now, Mr. Henderson. But what happens tomorrow when the data is restored? You go back to being the boss, and I go back to being the guy you fire over a granola bar wrapper. I needed something concrete, something humiliating, and something that demonstrated a genuine shift in the power dynamic. Here is what I need, I said, my voice low and firm, taking total command of the situation. First, an immediate written contract guaranteeing me a position as Chief Systems Architect. Not just a coder, a management position with signing power and a budget. Second, a clause stating that you, Mr. Henderson, will personally deliver a box of 3 Kit Kats to my desk every Monday morning for the next year. And third, and most importantly, you will deliver a complete, unscripted public apology to me and the entire IT staff, acknowledging your error and thanking us for saving the company the moment this is over. The veins were throbbing in his neck. He balked at the last demand, the public apology. It was anathema to his pride. He'd rather lose the money than admit weakness. Jake, the raise is fine. The title is fine. But the apology, in front of everyone. That's the deal, sir, I stated, completely unwavering. It's not for me. It's for the principal. It's for every person you've ever intimidated with a list of grievances or fired over a scarf. You either start changing the culture now, or you can watch your database turn into digital dust. He looked at the empty screen, then at the clock. The Cynosure Group meeting was in less than 2 hours. He was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped by his own hubris. He sighed, defeated. The sound wasn't the dramatic flair of a corporate tyrant. It was the hollow sigh of a man facing reality. Chief Systems Architect. Triple the salary. And the Kit Kats. Done. Now, for the love of God, please start working, Jake. I nodded, the contract sealed not with paper, but with his pure, abject terror. It felt good. Now, time to see if I could actually pull off the impossible. With the impossible demands met, the title upgrade, the triple salary, the profoundly humiliating Kit Kat-related penance, the psychological landscape of Mr. Henderson's office shifted entirely. The panic didn't disappear, but it was now channeled into a desperate, focused silence. He stood back, leaning against the doorframe, watching me with a mixture of terror and grudging respect. I, meanwhile, felt the exhilarating chill of professional purpose finally overriding personal resentment. The problem was huge, beautiful, and potentially career-defining. My first task was triage. I needed to know exactly what the recursive delete command had hit. I physically moved the server box, a powerful, heavy rack-mounted unit usually tucked away in the IT closet, onto Henderson's pristine mahogany desk, ignoring the protest in his wide, horrified eyes. "Don't worry," I muttered, already plugging a diagnostic laptop directly into the server's console port. "A few smudges of dust are the least of your concerns right now." The server, a high-end Dell machine named Ozymandias, by a long-gone, overly dramatic former IT manager, booted up with agonizing slowness. Every line of code that scrolled on the screen felt like a lifetime. When the command prompt finally appeared, I went straight to the heart of the matter, accessing the disk volume table. What I saw was, in technical terms, horrifying. The logical drive housing the Aegis database was there, but its allocated storage space was reporting as 99.9% free. The system hadn't just removed the files. It had essentially reinitialized the directory structure for that entire partition. Henderson's rm/rf command, run with administrative privileges at the root level, had been brutally efficient. It hadn't corrupted the data. It had instantly declared the space empty, clearing the digital roadmap that pointed to the location of millions of individual data points. I swiveled the screen towards Henderson. "Look at this, sir. The system thinks this drive is practically empty. The good news? The data might still be physically on the disk. When you delete something, the system usually just removes the file name and marks the space as available. The data remains until a new file writes over it." Henderson squinted at the screen. "And the bad news? The bad news is that the server is still running. And as it runs, it writes temporary logs, system updates, and swap files, which will progressively overwrite the deleted Aegis data. Every second we wait, the chances of recovering the most recent, most critical client data, the stuff Cynosure Group is going to ask for, drops exponentially. The gravity of the clock is ticking section of the crisis hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at his expensive watch. The Cynosure Group CEO, Ms. Davies, is due in exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes. We can't rely on the physical integrity of the disk. We need to shut this thing down now and image the drive before the system decides to do any more damage, I explained, already reaching for the power button. "Wait, shut it down?" Henderson's voice was high-pitched again. "Isn't there some magic command you can type, Jake? A simple recovery script?" "No, sir. This isn't a simple mistake. It's a corporate death blow. Any attempt to run software or scripts on the live system risks further overwriting the very data we're trying to save. We need to put the patient in a coma." I didn't wait for his permission. I performed an emergency shutdown, ignoring the cascading error messages that flashed as the operating system protested. The cooling fans wound down to a sigh, and the office plunged into a deep, heavy silence. "Now what?" Henderson whispered, rubbing his sweaty palms on his trousers. "Now, we need a separate, clean computer, an external drive, and a forensic data recovery suite," I said, listing the items on my fingers. "I need to connect this drive as a secondary, non-bootable disk to a machine that won't try to write anything to it. Then, I need to use specialized software to look at the raw binary code and start piecing the database files back together." The look on his face suggested that I had just asked for a piece of the sun and a unicorn to ride it in on. A separate computer? They're all networked. And the IT guys are gone for the day. They left early for that mandatory safety seminar. The universe, I realized, truly loved to complicate things. The main IT room was locked, and the technician in charge of the key was indeed at an off-site safety seminar, ironically teaching people how to prevent accidents. "Fine. We improvise," I said, already looking around the office. Henderson had a secondary, powerful workstation tucked in a credenza for running complex financial modeling. "We use that one. Get the key for the credenza. And I need the biggest, fastest external hard drive you have, right now." He fumbled with his massive key ring, unlocking the cabinet. Inside, along with the workstation, was a brand new, enormous solid-state drive, SSD, a ridiculously fast drive he probably bought just to brag about. Perfect. I quickly cannibalized the workstation, extracting the necessary SATA cables and the power supply. Connecting the Ozymandias server drive to the auxiliary machine was a messy, awkward procedure performed right on the expensive rug. I downloaded the necessary forensic recovery software, a licensed version I just so happened to know the master key for, and launched the analysis. The software began its deep scan of the wiped Aegis partition. The initial progress bar was agonizingly slow, estimating a completion time of over 6 hours. We had less than 2. I knew I couldn't wait for a full scan. I had to try a faster, riskier technique. I tried to bypass the full scan by manually searching for the signature header of the core Aegis SQL database file. But as soon as I executed the search command, the screen flashed a single, terrifying error message: "Signature file not found. Check disk allocation map integrity." I frowned. That error meant the wipe was even more profound than I thought. It meant the deletion command hadn't just removed the data map. It had somehow corrupted the low-level metadata about the Aegis file types themselves. This wasn't just a challenge. This was an unexpected, deep, and crippling technical roadblock. The first major glitch that threatened to stop me dead in my tracks. The error message: "Signature file not found. Check disk allocation map integrity," was a sharp, cold slap of reality. It instantly vaporized any residual glee I had felt over my new title and the Kit Kat clause. This was no longer just a satisfying display of corporate justice. This was now a desperate race against a nearly impossible technical wall. I physically recoiled from the screen, running my fingers through my hair. Mr. Henderson, who had been hovering nervously, noticed the change in my demeanor. The sight of a frustrated IT professional is often more terrifying to an executive than a flashing red light. "What is it, Jake? Did you hit a firewall? Did that ARM command somehow lock the drive?" he whispered, his own rising panic a tangible thing that seemed to be vibrating the desk. "Worse, sir," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "When you executed the command, it didn't just delete the pointers to the files. It looks like it corrupted the fundamental metadata that defines the structure of those files. The recovery software doesn't know what it's looking for. It can't even recognize the core database files, fingerprint, or signature, so it can't begin to reconstruct it." Essentially, the database, the heart of the company, was an enormous, complex jigsaw puzzle. And Henderson hadn't just scattered the pieces. He had wiped the picture off the box and destroyed the guide. I felt that familiar, heavy sensation of a moral dilemma pressing down on me. I was tired, adrenaline fatigued, and honestly, a small, dark part of my mind screamed, "This is your perfect exit. Say it's unrecoverable. Walk out, and the humiliation will be total and absolute for him. You upheld your end of the bargain by trying." But the image of Sarah from accounts, clutching her bag and looking completely bewildered, flashed in my mind. She had bills to pay, just like me. The people who would suffer the most from this disaster weren't sitting in corner offices. They were the people who actually kept the lights on. My fight was with Henderson's toxicity, not with the existence of the company. I took a deep breath. Okay, we can't do the easy route. We have to go manual. The database file is too large to fully recover piece by piece in this time frame. We need to focus on what Cynosure Group needs right now. Which is? Henderson leaned in, eager for a concrete task. They need the last 12 months of transaction history, right? And the most current client contact list. I confirmed. The good news is that those pieces of data are likely clumped together in specific, recently used sections of the disk. The bad news is we have to use a hexadecimal editor to find them. I could see the word hexadecimal make his eyes glaze over. It was time to simplify. Think of the disk like a massive, unmarked library. Everything is gone. We know the most recent, most important books were placed on the top shelf, but we don't have a catalog. I have to go shelf by shelf, reading the first line of every book in a foreign language, that's hexadecimal, until I find the correct text structure that screams, "This is the Cynosure transaction data." This wasn't just tedious, it was an incredibly high-stakes forensic dive. One wrong byte, one misinterpretation of a string of code, and the restored data would be completely useless, potentially even causing errors when the client tried to access it. I immediately began setting up the environment. I opened the low-level disk editor, which displayed the raw data as a relentless, scrolling wall of numbers and letters. 4D 59 53 51 4C 20 54 41 42 4C 45 20 44 41 54 41 0A. I need silence, Mr. Henderson. Complete silence. And I need coffee. Not that instant stuff, the real deal. But go. He looked startled at the command, but the weight of the moment and the desperate hope of salvation was enough to push him out the door. Alone with the raw data, the true challenge became apparent. Even with my expertise, searching for data this way was like trying to find a single grain of sand on a vast beach. I knew the general data structure of the Aegis SQL tables, the specific patterns of the client IDs and transaction dates. I started inputting key hexadecimal sequences I'd memorized from optimizing those very tables. 5 minutes in, and my eyes were already burning from tracking the relentless scrolling of code. I found a string of repeated characters, likely a section of the disk that had been partially overwritten by a temporary log file. Disappointment hit hard. 10 minutes later, I spotted a glimmer of hope, a sequence that typically defined the start of an internal system metadata block. I followed it, carefully scrolling, looking for the telltale repeating pattern of a date-time stamp. Just as I thought I was close to locating the recent client data, my focus broke. The door opened and Henderson returned, balancing a wobbling tray with 2 full cups of coffee and a nervous energy that seemed to vibrate the very air. "Here you are, Jake. Strong and black, just like you asked." He placed the tray down, not gently, and the coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "silence. I'm trying to interpret machine code here." I snapped, the adrenaline and frustration boiling over. I know, I'm sorry. I just need to ask one thing. Do you think we can tell the Cynosure people that it was a system failure? An unavoidable cosmic ray corrupted the disk? Something outside of human error, he pleaded. And there it was. The moment of truth. Even facing total annihilation, he was already laying the groundwork for a lie. He was trying to minimize his fault, trying to salvage his pride before I had even saved the company. The temptation to let him crash and burn became almost unbearable. I had to make a choice, continue to punish the man or save the workers. My moral compass, thankfully, pointed toward the latter. I still had to save the company, but I didn't have to tolerate his spin. "No, sir," I said coldly, pointing back at the screen full of unintelligible code. "You are going to tell the Cynosure Group the truth, or you're going to lose the company. But before you can tell them anything, I have to find this data. Now please leave the room." Mr. Henderson took the rebuke like a stunned ox. The command to leave the room, delivered with the absolute authority of someone holding the corporate survival kit, was enough to stop his spin doctoring cold. He retreated, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone with the humming server drive and the relentless scroll of hexadecimal code. The solitude was crucial. This level of forensic recovery required total, uninterrupted focus. My fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between the raw data stream and the patterns I had meticulously documented years ago while optimizing the Aegis database structure. This wasn't something you learned in a class. This was institutional knowledge combined with years of late nights staring at code. I was essentially playing a high-stakes, real-time memory game with millions of data blocks. The core problem, remember, was that the file headers, the digital envelopes that told the system, hey, this chunk of data is named Q4 financial report, and it ends here, we're gone. I was hunting for the digital equivalent of a water cooler conversation. I needed to find a sequence of bits that was so distinct, so particular to the Aegis SQL tables, that I could manually flag it and tell the recovery software, start the file here. I bypassed the initial junk I had found and jumped forward in the data stream, focusing on the areas of the disk that contain the most recent activity. New files tend to write close to old files, and since Henderson had performed a total recursive wipe, I figured the most recent client data was likely the first to be marked as deleted. After what felt like an hour, but was likely only 10 frantic minutes, I saw it. A series of repeating characters, 5B43 4C49 45 4E54 5D followed by a precise, 10-digit numeric sequence. That specific hexadecimal combination translated roughly to client, followed by a unique ID pattern that only Aegis used. I had found the first anchor point of the live client contact table, the most vital information for the Cynosure group meeting. Yes, I muttered, a wave of adrenaline washing away the fatigue. I immediately created a manual file header in the recovery software and told it to start reading from that specific block address. The software, now given an instruction it could follow, began reconstructing the table. It was a miracle of algorithmic guesswork, pulling data blocks from surrounding sectors and stitching them together. But the success was immediately followed by the realization of the next problem, the backup secret. As the client table rebuilt, the recovery software displayed a status log. I noticed a massive discrepancy. The table I was reconstructing was dated only up to 3 days ago. Where was the data from this morning? I scrolled through the system log files, the fragments of data the recursive delete couldn't fully eradicate, and found the chilling truth. The company hadn't just stopped the off-site tape backups 3 months ago, as Henderson had admitted. They had also, in a truly stunning act of penny-pinching, quietly disabled the redundant local array 6 weeks ago. The company's expensive server had 2 physical storage arrays designed to mirror each other in real time. If one failed, the other instantly took over. This was the system Henderson had boasted about relying on to save those $400 a month in off-site storage costs. But the log files clearly showed that the mirror had been intentionally broken and the second array repurposed to store huge, temporary media files for the marketing department. This wasn't just poor practice, it was the ultimate, ignored flaw in the system. Henderson's belief that he had a safety net was a complete, calculated delusion fueled by greed. He had eliminated the off-site insurance and the on-site redundancy. The data I was hunting for wasn't just deleted, it was sitting on an unprotected, single point of failure that the system was actively using. Any power fluctuation, any minor system error, any new file being written would instantly and permanently destroy the evidence. I felt a cold rage. This was worse than the Kit Kat firing. This was criminal negligence driven by corporate short-sightedness. I opened the door and found Henderson still pacing outside, chewing on his fingernails. "Mr. Henderson, get in here." "Now," I commanded. My tone left no room for argument. He shuffled in, his eyes darting to the screen. "Is it working? Did you find the Aegis?" "I found fragments. But I also found this," I said, pointing to the log showing the disabled redundancy. "You told me you stopped the off-site backups but were relying on the local redundant array. Sir, you disabled the mirror 6 weeks ago. The IT log shows the command was executed by your account." He turned pale. "No, No, I didn't. That must have been one of the junior techs. They must have made a mistake when they repurposed the marketing storage. Stop, sir. It was your administrative account. And you were the only person with the credentials to execute the command that breaks the mirror. This isn't just about deleting the database, it's about removing every single safety protocol in the building because you wanted to save a few bucks on data storage and then repurpose the space for a massive amount of low-priority media. He slumped into his chair, the last vestige of his corporate power dissolving into shame. I thought the redundancy was still active. I was told it was only a temporary measure. Just until the next quarterly review. I never meant to leave it exposed. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The man who obsessed over 3 chocolate bars had, in his own greed and recklessness, exposed the entire company to a near-fatal risk over a far greater sum. Well, now you know the truth, I said, slamming my hand on the desk. We are operating with zero safety net. If that machine hiccups, or if I make one mistake in my manual reconstruction, it's over. Cynosure leaves, and everyone goes home for good. You understand the stakes now, sir? The problem isn't the deletion. The problem is your arrogance and refusal to invest in the infrastructure that sustains your business. He didn't argue. He just stared at the screen, the white panic now mixed with a deep, crushing understanding of his own failure. The moral dilemma was gone. I had to finish the job, not for him, but for everyone he had endangered. The realization that Mr. Henderson's reckless frugality had disabled both the off-site tapes and the internal mirror array was the true turning point. The conflict was now purified. It wasn't just about recovering data. It was about confronting the systemic toxicity that put the entire company at risk. My personal resentment solidified into a cold, professional resolve. The clock wasn't just ticking for the Cynosure group meeting. It was ticking on the physical write cycles of the disk itself. I spun back to the screen, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Henderson's shame was irrelevant now, only the code mattered. I had the first anchor point for the client contact table, and the recovery software was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding it. I needed to move on to the more complex part, the actual transaction history, the detailed financial logs that Cynosure really cared about. The transaction data was stored in a separate set of files that were heavily interlinked, a relational database structure. If I missed a single core file, the whole thing would be useless, a jumble of floating data points. I started the manual hex hunt again, jumping forward to the area of the disk that logically should have held the latest Q4 financial reports. I was deep in the code, my eyes blurring as I searched for the specific byte sequence that signaled a transaction header. Something like 545241-4E53 followed by a 2-digit year code. The silence in the office was so intense it felt like a pressure cooker. Henderson was glued to his chair, motionless, his breathing shallow. Suddenly, a loud, insistent beep 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 sliced through the silence. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It wasn't the server, it was the desk phone. The red light indicating an incoming external call was flashing aggressively. Henderson's eyes shot wide open. He lunged for the phone. "No, don't." I hissed, but I was too late. He snatched the receiver. "Hello," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. He listened for a moment, and his face went from pale to a terrifying shade of corporate gray. He mouthed a word to me, "Davies." It was Ms. Davies, the CEO of the Cynosure Group, calling an hour early. "Yes, Ms. Davies, of course. We're just finalizing the visual presentation now. Everything is pristine. Ready to go." "Yes." He forced a loud, maniacal-sounding chuckle. "Is that so? Well, we can certainly be flexible." "Oh, you're at the lobby coffee shop now? Wonderful. We can start early. 15 minutes? Perfect." He hung up, the handset shaking in his grasp. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the phone as if it had betrayed him. 15 minutes, Jake," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "The meeting has been moved up. They're here. They're in the building. 15 minutes. The already ticking clock had just turned into a sand timer with a hole in the bottom. The rising tension was immediate, physical. My hands started to sweat. 15 minutes was enough time to pour myself a coffee, but absolutely not enough time to forensically reconstruct a relational database. I abandoned the hex hunt. A full, successful recovery was no longer an option. I had to pivot to a minimal viable data set, the absolute bare minimum required to get through the presentation and avoid total corporate collapse. New plan, I said, my voice sharp with adrenaline. Forget the detailed transactions. We're going for the summary report data. Every quarter, the system generated a static, simplified summary table for executive review. It wasn't the raw data, but it had the critical, aggregated figures: total revenue, total transactions, and key performance indicators. The file was smaller, simpler in structure, and crucially, less interlinked. It was a single JPEG compared to a whole 3D film. I went back to the recovery software. Because the file was static and less frequently updated than the live tables, it was potentially less overwritten. I knew its specific file size and its creation date. I fed those two metadata points into the recovery software as parameters for a deep scan. A shot in the dark, hoping the file had a unique enough signature in that specific size range. The software churned, far faster this time, only searching for a very specific target. The progress bar jumped to 40% immediately. What are you doing? Is it working? Henderson demanded, now crouching right beside me, completely ignoring all boundaries. I'm hunting for the summary data, I explained, not taking my eyes off the screen. It's the only thing we can get in time. If I can find the header and the footer of that summary report, we can present the numbers and tell Ms. Davies the full, detailed data set is undergoing system migration or security enhancement and will be available in 48 hours. That's a lie, he protested, his voice laced with indignation. I wheeled on him, tired of his selective morality. It's a holding action. It's better than telling them, I deleted all your money and your history over a rogue command. Now, shut up and go find a blank presentation deck. We need a slide to put these numbers on the second I pull them off the disk. He scurried away, finally galvanized into productive panic. The progress bar hit 90%. I held my breath. The system was now piecing together the final blocks. A small dialog box flashed on the screen. File header found. File footer found. Attempting reconstruction. A second later, a tiny file icon appeared in the recovery folder. I had the summary report. I copied it to a flash drive, feeling a powerful surge of relief. But the file size was small. Too small. I opened it. The data was there, but it was corrupted. The last 4 months, the most critical data for the Cynosure Group review, were a string of zeros, overwritten by a system log before I could power down the server. I had the summary, but the summary was useless. Total, catastrophic failure, right when I thought I was close. The partially recovered summary report, a tantalizing but ultimately useless set of figures, with the most crucial recent data wiped out and replaced by rows of mocking zeros, felt like a cruel joke. I had the form of success, but the substance was a void. I was staring at the corrupted file, defeated, when Mr. Henderson returned, clutching a pristine flash drive containing the company's PowerPoint template. He saw the expression on my face, and his already anxious features crumbled further. "Jake? What's wrong? You look like you just saw a ghost," he choked out, peering over my shoulder. "I found the quarterly summary," I said, my voice flat. "But the last 4 months, the Q4 data, the stuff Ms. Davies is here for, it's gone. Overwritten. Irrecoverably." I explained the concept of data overwrite, how the disk had been so busy logging its own internal processes after the initial deletion that it had paved over the most valuable information. Henderson didn't scream or shout. Instead, he collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. "It's over. It's all over." His voice was muffled and small, the sound of a truly broken man. "My God, my wife, my house, the layoffs. It'll be a complete collapse." I felt a flash of pity, quickly squashed by my professional adrenaline. Pity wouldn't fix the disk. We had less than 10 minutes before Ms. Davies and the Cynosure Group executives would be walking through that door. "No, it's not over," I said, though I felt hollow saying it. I still have the first table. The client contact list. I need to figure out why the Q4 data was overwritten so quickly. It doesn't make sense. I started scrolling through the remaining fragments of system logs, looking for an anomaly. The recursive delete command was supposed to have stopped when I yanked the Ethernet cable. Why was the system still aggressively writing data? And then I saw it buried deep in the logs. A scheduled task. A massive, recurring database optimization process designed to run automatically every 4 hours. It was a utility I myself had written, designed to defragment the aegis structure and improve query speed. It was a feature, not a bug, but in this scenario, it was a data-killing time bomb. The first thing that optimization script did? It wrote a temporary, massive indexing file to the drive, right over the space that had just been marked free. I know what happened, I announced, running a hand through my hair. It was my own script. My optimization process ran, saw the disk space was empty, and wrote a huge temp file right over the most recent data. That's what wiped the Q4 summary. The irony was crushing. The code I wrote to improve the company had just destroyed it. Henderson looked up, his face a mask of desperation. So you admit it? It's your fault then. You wrote the script. You were the architect of the system that killed us. The heat of pure anger flared in my chest. This was it, the predicted blame game. Under pressure, the true, toxic Henderson resurfaced, immediately trying to deflect responsibility. Listen to me, sir. I wrote a professional, highly efficient script to optimize a database. That script was only able to destroy the data because you used the recursive delete command and you disabled every single backup measure. My script was designed to run on a system protected by 3 layers of redundancy. It's like blaming the speed limit sign for a wreck when the driver intentionally cut the brake lines and ran a red light. I stood up, pushing back from the desk. I'm the only thing holding this company together right now, and you are still trying to shift blame and save your own ego? I am the only reason we have any hope left. You signed a contract 10 minutes ago making me chief systems architect. You will treat me like one, or I walk out, and you explain to Ms. Davies why your server is now a brick. He flinched. The combination of my fury and the undeniable truth finally broke through his thick corporate hide. He didn't just back down. He completely folded. You're right. I'm sorry, Jake. That was the stress talking. I'm sorry, he mumbled, genuinely chastened. Just, please. I'll take the blame. Whatever it takes. Just save the data. I nodded curtly, the fight draining my last reserves of energy, but solidifying the new power dynamic. The air was thick with the faint scent of ozone from the server and the bitter taste of corporate defeat. I looked at the server one last time. There was one chance left, one highly risky, almost legendary technique. It wasn't about finding the files anymore. It was about finding the physical remnants of the data that the server hadn't finished wiping. I need to attempt a raw sector sweep, I announced. It's incredibly unstable, and if the power flickers, it's going to corrupt the entire drive. I need to go deeper than the recovery software allows. I need to access the disk at the hardware level. Henderson looked terrified. A power flicker? It's a thunderstorm outside. Indeed, a low, distant rumble of thunder echoed outside the window. The universe was certainly not making this easy. I had minutes. This was my final, high-stakes gamble. The thunder outside, now less distant, was a terrifying soundtrack to the impending doom. Mr. Henderson's frantic pacing had resumed, and his earlier apology was already starting to feel fragile. But my focus was absolute. I had to ignore his renewed anxiety and the physical threat of the storm. The final, most dangerous option was all that remained, a raw sector sweep. This wasn't something you did with off-the-shelf software. I had to use a specific, low-level utility that bypassed the operating system's file structure entirely and started reading the disk platter block by block. Think of it like this. The standard recovery software drives around the digital neighborhood looking for houses with specific mailboxes, file headers. Since Henderson had blown up the mailboxes, I now had to drive the digital equivalent of a massive, unstoppable bulldozer over the entire neighborhood and see what rubble looked like the remains of a house, data structure. I quickly opened a command line utility, a dark, minimalist interface that only a true geek could love. I started manually inputting the parameters for the sweep, the disk identifier, the starting and ending sectors for the Q4 data, and the specific signature I was hunting for, the raw binary pattern of a repeating transaction record. "Jake, are you sure about this?" Henderson asked, his voice shaking. "You said a power flicker could corrupt the entire drive. The lights outside are blinking." "I'm sure it's the only shot we have," I retorted, not looking up. "A raw sector sweep is highly sensitive. The disk controller is going to be running at maximum capacity, pulling data blocks that have been marked empty. If the power drops, even for a millisecond, the write head could crash, or the sector map could be irreversibly scrambled. It's a miracle the company is still running without any battery backup." Another flash of thunder lit up the office, and the overhead fluorescent lights momentarily dimmed, flickered, and then stabilized. Henderson gasped, letting out a small, choked sound. "Go to the breaker panel," I commanded, my voice suddenly steely. "It's on the other side of the hallway, near the water fountain. Stand next to it. If the lights dim again, I need you to brace yourself. Do not, under any circumstance, touch anything. But just being near it might give us a millisecond of warning if the main current drops." He hesitated for a second, then recognized the severity of my tone. The great Mr. Henderson, the CEO, was now relegated to being the human canary in the corporate coal mine, standing watch over the electrical panel. He darted out of the room. I was alone again, the darkness of the console window reflecting in my eyes. I executed the raw sector sweep. The command line exploded into life, showing a torrent of data addresses being read. Unlike the previous slow, methodical scan, this was a high-speed torrent of information. I had to manually monitor the data stream, filtering the noise for the specific patterns of the transaction records. Minutes bled into each other. Sweat was beading on my forehead. My entire world narrowed down to the green text on the black screen. I was looking for patterns. The sequence of client IDs, the standard decimal format of the transaction amounts, and the unique time stamps. And then I found it. A perfect, repeating string of transaction data, completely intact, sitting in a sector that should have been overwritten by the system optimization script. It was a digital oasis in a desert of junk data. My breath caught in my throat. I quickly tagged the block, creating a new, temporary file that contained the pure, unadulterated Q4 transaction data. Success. I had it. I reached for the external SSD to copy the precious file. The difference between corporate survival and total failure, when the building was hit by an enormous clap of thunder. The sound was deafening, vibrating the windows. The lights didn't just dim, they went out completely. The server, the monitor, my diagnostic laptop, everything went instantly, terrifyingly dark. The only illumination was the rapid, strobing blue light from the now dying capacitors inside the equipment. The entire office plunged into a deep, oppressive silence. For a moment, I just stared into the darkness, the phantom green text still burned onto my retina. The adrenaline instantly changed to a crushing wave of despair. A second later, the emergency backup lights, dim yellow rectangles usually ignored, flickered on, casting long, strange shadows. "Jake, what happened?" "The power. The whole floor is dark." Henderson shouted from the hallway, his voice high and panicked. I slowly reached for the server. It was utterly silent. The power surged, then dropped. I said, my voice heavy with defeat. The system crashed. I was in the middle of writing the recovery file to the external drive. If the write head was active when the power died, it may have caused a physical crash. I don't know the state of the drive. I forced the auxiliary workstation back on. The boot process was slower this time. When it finally loaded, I tried to access the server's drive. The operating system gave me a grim, definitive message: disk volume corruption, unreadable format. The power surge hadn't just stopped the process, it had scrambled the disk's table of contents. I had been seconds from saving the data, and the universe, or maybe just the shoddy building infrastructure, had intervened. The data wasn't just deleted now, it was potentially locked behind an impossible layer of structural corruption. It was the lowest point. Cynosure was minutes away. The data was now technically inaccessible. The silence after the power surge was deafening, the kind of stillness that swallows sound and hope whole. The workstation was back on, but the chilling message, disk volume corruption, unreadable format, stared back at me, a digital tombstone. The entire drive, holding the fragments of the Aegis database and, more importantly, the almost recovered Q4 transaction data, was inaccessible. Mr. Henderson shuffled back into the room from the hallway, his face drawn. The near miss with the power drop had completely drained him. He saw the error message, and the last flicker of hope in his eyes was extinguished. "It's gone, isn't it, Jake?" he asked, his voice hollow. "It's really, truly gone." I didn't answer right away. I was running scenarios, 1,000 possibilities flashing through my mind. The data was there, physically, but the map, the volume allocation table, was corrupted. It was like having a massive, valuable treasure chest but losing the key and having the lock fuse shut. "The data is probably still on the physical platter," I finally said, the words heavy with uncertainty. "But the file system, the operating system's way of indexing what's where, is scrambled. It thinks the entire disk is a mess of useless blocks. We can't access it." The irony was now layered and complex. My own optimization script had caused the data overwrite, and now the building's infrastructure, the lack of an uninterruptible power supply UPS, another thing Henderson had likely deemed too expensive, had physically prevented the recovery. His toxicity and my technical brilliance had, in a terrible feedback loop, engineered the company's downfall. The intercom on Henderson's desk crackled to life. His secretary's nervous, muffled voice came through. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. Davies and her team are here. I've seated them in the main conference room. They look impatient." 7 minutes. We had 7 minutes before Henderson had to walk in there and deliver the worst news of his career. He looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. He wasn't the arrogant tyrant anymore. He was just a scared, middle-aged man who had finally realized the irreversible consequence of his actions. "I can't face them, Jake," he confessed, sinking into his chair. "I can't tell them I destroyed 10 years of their business records because I was too cheap to pay for a better backup system. I just can't." I stared at the corrupted drive message. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of the situation somehow cleared my head. When all the easy, logical options are exhausted, the only remaining paths are the insane ones. I remembered something, a long-shot, highly unconventional data recovery maneuver I had stumbled across years ago on a deep-dive, obscure IT forum. It was a technique used by niche forensic experts to shock a corrupted volume back into submission, essentially forcing the system to temporarily ignore the corrupted volume allocation table and rebuild a minimal file system based on a known sector address. It was the digital equivalent of hitting a broken TV set just right so the picture snaps back into focus for 5 seconds. It was wildly dangerous. If it failed, it wouldn't just be an unreadable format, it would be a permanently unreadable slab of metal. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice low and determined. "It's insane. It's a hack, not a fix. It has about a 1% chance of working, and if it fails, the drive will be destroyed beyond all recovery, even by a professional lab." Henderson didn't hesitate. He was past the point of caution. "Do it. Anything, Jake. Please. Just give me one slide. One chart of accurate numbers I can show Ms. Davies." I leaned in, accessing the disk utility one last time. This hack required me to manually write a specific sequence of binary code directly to the first few blocks of the disk, the master boot record area, bypassing all safety checks. This was basically talking directly to the hardware and forcing it to lie to the operating system about its state. "If this works, it won't fix the disk," I explained rapidly as I typed the complex sequence. "It will just force the volume to mount long enough for me to yank the Q4 data off. It's a smash and grab operation." I typed the final command and hit enter. The screen froze for a terrifying moment. The cursor blinked, once, twice. The drive made a faint, whirring noise, a high-pitched, almost painful sound of a system struggling against its own internal failure. And then, miraculously, the screen flashed. The error message vanished, replaced by a simple dialog box. Drive volume detected. Attempting read. It worked. I had bought a seconds. The disk was online, but it was running on borrowed time. The moment the system tried to fully read the corrupted allocation table, it would crash again. I didn't wait. My fingers flew, navigating directly to the exact sector where I had tagged the Q4 transaction data moments before the power drop. I used the fastest copy command possible, directing the precious, tiny recovery file straight to the external SSD. The copy progress bar flashed. 1%, 5%, 10%. I heard the distinct sound of the elevator bell and the low murmur of professional voices just outside the hallway. The Cynosure group had arrived. The sound of the elevator bell, the low, confident voices of the Cynosure group executives. It was the auditory cue of the final countdown. We were on a digital ledge, operating on a fragile, manually forced connection. The copy progress bar for the Q4 transaction data was creeping forward. 35%, 40%. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to vomit on his Persian rug. He was frozen, staring at the closed office door, convinced that any second, Ms. Davies would stride in, wearing a sharp suit and the expression of a woman who was about to personally dismantle his company. They're walking past the secretary now, Jake. They're going into the conference room, he whispered, relaying the timeline with the horrified detail of a man narrating his own execution. Please hurry. I am moving as fast as the hardware will allow. I snapped back, my entire focus glued to the copy bar. The drive was constantly fighting the forced access. Every few seconds, the screen would flicker, and the command prompt would stall, threatening to revert to the corrupted state. I had to repeatedly execute a quick, stabilizing sequence of code to keep the connection alive. It was like juggling an active grenade. 65%, 70%. The file was small, but the sector-by-sector read was agonizingly slow. I could hear the distinct sound of the conference room chairs scraping against the floor. They were settling in. Mr. Henderson, stop watching the door. Find a blank slide on that flash drive and copy it to the computer. I need a place to display these numbers the second I get them. He fumbled with the auxiliary workstation, pulling up the PowerPoint template. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely control the mouse. 90%, 95%. Victory was within reach. The raw data was flowing, validating itself bite by bite. The relief was starting to flood my system, pushing back the adrenaline. I was going to pull this off. I was going to save the company, humiliate the boss, and secure the best contract of my life. 99%. And then, the drive let out a terrible, high-pitched screech, a mechanical groan of pure hardware failure. The screen instantly reverted to the terrifying, familiar error, disk volume corruption, unreadable format. The power of the disk hack had run out. The connection was lost. The copy failed. I slammed my fist silently on the desk. No, I was 1 second too late. Henderson stared at the error message, his face utterly blank. He had watched the entire digital drama unfold, from the deleted files to the corrupted volume, to the final, fatal crash. He opened his mouth, but instead of the blame I expected, he just let out a long, shuddering sigh of pure, absolute defeat. It's done, Jake, he said, his voice flat. It's truly finished. Just go home. You tried your best. It was my fault from the Kit Kats to the recursive delete to the cheap power supply. I'm sorry. The unexpected resignation in his tone was more powerful than any argument. He finally, completely, accepted the full weight of his responsibility. The moral compass had clicked into place. But I wasn't ready to give up. The failure of the copy process didn't mean the data was gone. It meant the copy failed. Wait, I muttered, leaning in closer. The file system crashed, but the copy command ran right up to the end. I need to check the destination drive. I quickly navigated to the external SSD. There was a file there, the same file name I had directed the data to, but the size was slightly smaller than expected. It wasn't the full, clean file, but it wasn't zero either. It was a partial copy, a fragment of the Q4 data pulled off the disk just before the connection severed. I opened the file. It was a mess. Header information was missing, and the data was choppy, with random blocks of code mixed in. But I could see the actual numbers, the Q4 total revenue figures, the net profit margins, the core KPIs. It was visually ugly, but the data itself was structurally intact. It was a Hail Mary. It was an executive summary delivered on a dirty napkin, but it was accurate. I quickly isolated the key figures, the 3 most important percentages Ms. Davies would want to see. I had mere seconds. I shouted to Henderson, who was still slumped in the chair. "Mr. Henderson, I have 3 numbers. They're accurate, but I can't guarantee the rest. Copy them to the presentation slide, right now. Big font, bold. Just those 3. He snapped out of his defeated daze and lurched forward, typing the numbers I rattled off, the essential revenue and growth figures, onto the blank PowerPoint slide. As he hit save, his secretary called out from the doorway, her voice tight with panic. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. Davies is asking if you are ready. She says they have a tight schedule." He looked at the screen, a single, stark slide with 3 perfect hard-won numbers, and then back at me. He looked terrified, but also strangely composed, having faced the absolute worst. "I need you to come with me, Jake," he said, grabbing the flash drive. "You are my chief systems architect. You are the only person who can explain this disaster and what we have recovered." I nodded, grabbing my own, less polished laptop. This was the moment of the resolution and client arrival. We walked out of the office, the air heavy with the smell of failure and the triumph of a single, salvaged data file. We approached the conference room doors, the low murmur of the Cynosure Group's conversation growing louder. Henderson paused, took a deep breath, and turned to me one last time. "Thank you, Jake." It wasn't a corporate platitude, it was a genuine admission of debt and respect. Then he pushed the double doors open. The conference room was everything Mr. Henderson's office wasn't: cool, brightly lit, and utterly composed. Sitting around the huge, polished table were 3 members of the Cynosure Group, led by Ms. Davies, a woman who exuded an intimidating calm. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and a patient but sharp expression that signaled she had absolutely no time for corporate nonsense. As we entered, all conversation stopped. The Cynosure team looked at us with an air of professional skepticism. Henderson, to his credit, didn't immediately shatter. He walked to the head of the table, inserted the flash drive into the projector, and the stark white slide with the 3 critical numbers, our sole salvation, blazed onto the wall. "Ms. Davies, thank you for being flexible with the time," Henderson began, his voice surprisingly level, though slightly strained. "I apologize for the presentation being minimal. We have encountered an unexpected, high-level system event that required us to engage our full forensic recovery protocol." Ms. Davies raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "System event, Mr. Henderson? We were hoping for the full 10-year data dive we requested for our contract review, not 3 numbers on a slide. Can you elaborate?" This was the moment of truth. He could lie, blame the system, or tell the humiliating, complicated truth. Henderson looked at me, then back at Ms. Davies. He took a deep, visible breath. "Ms. Davies, I am going to be entirely transparent with you, as our partnership demands it. Less than 2 hours ago, due to a severe lapse in judgment and an improper command execution by me, and this is solely my error, the core Aegis database was deleted. Furthermore, due to my cost-cutting measures, our critical backup systems were not active." The confession was stunning. The Cynosure team exchanged shocked glances. Ms. Davies' composure finally cracked, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You deleted 10 years of our data, Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "And you have no backups?" "I did," he corrected quickly, then gestured toward me. "However, I immediately called back the only person in the company capable of retrieving the data, our new chief systems architect, Jake. In less than 2 hours, navigating a completely compromised system during an electrical storm, Jake performed a highly unconventional, low-level data recovery that allowed us to extract the most essential Q4 financial summary data you see on the screen." He pushed my name and my title forward, explicitly shifting the attention and respect onto me. The numbers you see are accurate and validated, he continued, holding up the tiny external SSD drive. They were manually pulled, sector by sector, from the corrupted disk. The detailed, 10-year history is still on the disk, but it is locked behind a volume corruption. Jake is currently building a custom recovery routine to retrieve the full data set in the next 48 hours. He had done it. He had taken the blame fully and publicly, fulfilling his side of our humiliating bargain, and he had made me the hero of the hour. Miss Davies stared at me, her gaze intense and analytical. And you, Jake, you retrieved this data in under 2 hours? From a recursively deleted, non-redundant system. Yes, ma'am, I confirmed, stepping forward and clicking a button on my laptop to show a secondary slide I had been working on, a single graph illustrating the 3 recovered figures against previous year's performance. The recovery was a smash and grab. We prioritized the Q4 operational metrics you required for this meeting. I can guarantee the integrity of these 3 data points. I quickly walked them through the graph, explaining the growth figures and performance indicators, talking about the data as if the crisis hadn't just happened. I was confident, articulate, and completely in command of the numbers. Miss Davies leaned back in her chair. The crisis had now pivoted from being a sign of incompetence to a high-stakes drama demonstrating our crisis resilience and my technical prowess. She nodded slowly. Mr. Henderson, your honesty is appreciated, though the negligence is staggering. However, your new chief architect's performance is, frankly, astounding. To pull this off, against what sounds like impossible odds, demonstrates an IT capability we did not realize you possessed. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. We needed to see the Q4 numbers to finalize the contract. These 3 points, if validated, are sufficient for our immediate decision. We will send our own IT auditor here tomorrow morning to oversee Mr. Jake's recovery process for the full data set. If he succeeds, we renew the contract. If he fails, we walk. She stood up, extending her hand to Henderson. You narrowly escaped catastrophe today. And frankly, Mr. Henderson, you should be thanking your new chief systems architect for the survival of your company. Henderson shook her hand, and the relief washing over his face was palpable. The company was saved, at least for the next 48 hours, and most importantly, it was saved for the time it took to finish the meeting and get the Cynosure team out the door. As Ms. Davies and her team swept out of the conference room, leaving Henderson and me alone in the sudden silence, the true, unexpected twist of the evening settled in. I hadn't just saved the company, I had become its reluctant savior and its new center of power. The moment the conference room doors closed behind the Cynosure group, the highly controlled tension holding Mr. Henderson together evaporated. He didn't just look relieved. He looked like a man who had just survived being dragged across a razor wire fence. He didn't move for a long moment, simply leaning against the door, his eyes closed. I too felt the immense weight lift. The near failure, the frantic last-second recovery. It had been an emotional and technical marathon. I slowly packed up my diagnostic laptop and the precious external SSD that now held the fragmented, ugly, but perfectly accurate Q4 data. Henderson finally pushed himself off the door and shuffled over to the desk, collapsing back into his chair. He picked up his coffee mug, which was stone cold, and stared into the black liquid. You saved us, Jake, he said, his voice quiet and completely devoid of his usual bluster. Not the company, but us. You saved a lot of people's jobs, including mine. You were right to hold me to that bargain. He leaned forward, placing the mug down. This wasn't the fake, stress-induced apology from earlier. This felt genuine. He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time, I saw not the petty tyrant, but the flawed, deeply embarrassed human being underneath the expensive suit. I fired you over Kit Kats, he repeated, shaking his head slightly. And in the same hour, I nearly destroyed everything I've built because I was too cheap, too arrogant, and too focused on controlling minor details to see the big picture. That was a profound failure of leadership. He stood up, walking over to his desk drawer and pulling out a sheaf of papers. It was the contract we had drafted earlier. He scribbled a massive signature on the bottom line. The title is yours, Chief Systems Architect. The salary is triple what you were making, he confirmed, sliding the paper across the desk. But that's just compensation. That doesn't address the apology. He pulled out his phone. I need you to come to the main floor with me. Now. I followed him out of his office, down the main corridor, and toward the large open-plan office space where the remaining staff, Sarah, Dan from IT, and a few others who had worked late, were still nervously milling about, trying to look busy but obviously buzzing with fear and curiosity about the earlier meltdown. Henderson walked to the center of the floor, where a small digital screen usually cycled motivational quotes. He tapped the microphone on his phone and connected it to the office's main speaker system. The sudden, loud tap-tap silenced the entire floor. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, the one that had been yanked to the side during his earlier meltdown. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Everyone expected a terse, corporate statement about a minor system anomaly and a demand for everyone to work overtime. Instead, Henderson spoke, his voice projected loud and clear across the silent office. Everyone, please listen up for a moment. What you heard earlier was not a system anomaly. It was an executive disaster caused entirely by me, Mr. Henderson. A ripple of shock went through the assembled staff. Earlier today, I executed a command that deleted the entirety of the Aegis client database. I did this because I was careless, arrogant, and operating without the necessary safety checks, which I, myself, removed to save money. This was an existential threat to our company, and every single one of your jobs was at stake because of my reckless decisions. He paused, looking directly at me, who was standing slightly behind him. I also, prior to this catastrophe, made an unforgivable mistake of judgment. I terminated the employment of our most valuable employee, Jake, based on a trivial and irrational excuse. He turned fully to face me, in front of dozens of my colleagues. Jake, he said, the public humility heavy in his tone. I owe you an apology, and I owe this company one too. I was wrong. I was deeply, profoundly wrong. You are the only reason we are still standing right now. Your skill, your courage under fire, and your professionalism saved this company's future. He then turned back to the staff. As of this moment, Jake is our chief systems architect. He has earned the trust and respect that I, frankly, lost this afternoon. He will oversee the restoration of all data, and I expect everyone to give him your complete support. Thank you, Jake. And to all of you, thank you for bearing witness to my failure and for your commitment to this company. The office erupted, not in applause, but in a wave of relieved, astonished murmurs. Sarah walked up to me and silently gave me a fist bump. Dan looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. The apology was complete, the contract was signed, and the humiliation was total. I had won the ultimate corporate battle. I had the power, the money, and the respect. The job, which minutes ago had been a prison, was now a kingdom. I stood there, feeling the glow of vindication and victory, but beneath it, a strange, profound sense of emptiness began to settle in. I had the job, but did I really want it? The applause and the buzzing excitement from the staff died down, leaving me standing alone in the center of the office, holding the signed contract and the tiny SSD drive that now felt less like a tool of rescue and more like a symbol of a dysfunctional marriage I just reaffirmed. Mr. Henderson walked back into his office, a man who had been stripped bare and was now trying to put his clothes back on. I followed him, closing the door behind me. So, he said, sitting down heavily behind his desk. Where do we go from here, Chief Systems Architect? He used the title with a deference that was startling. First, we go hire some professional forensic specialists to oversee the full recovery, I stated, the professional part of my brain instantly taking over. And we buy 3 massive, industrial-grade UPS systems and 2 new off-site tape backup solutions. Immediately. I need those purchase orders signed this minute. He nodded, grabbing his pen. Done. Whatever you need. Your budget is essentially unlimited now. We nearly lost everything because I was worried about the price of a power strip. He signed the purchase orders without reading them. This was the new reality. Henderson was terrified of making another decision, and I was the one pulling the strategic levers. For the next half hour, we worked in total harmony. I was dictating priorities, signing off on new security protocols, and delegating recovery tasks. Henderson was nothing more than an executive assistant with assigning authority. I was truly the most powerful person in the room. But as I looked at the new contract, triple salary, massive title, and the humiliating Kit Kat clause printed in bold, I felt that lingering question return, sharper this time. I had everything I wanted from a professional standpoint, but the underlying reason I had been miserable here hadn't changed. Mr. Henderson, I began, placing the signed contract back on his desk. I appreciate the title, the salary, and the public apology more than I can say. It took real courage to do that in front of the whole staff, and it has absolutely changed the power dynamic here. He looked up, a faint smile of relief still playing on his lips. So you're staying? We need you, Jake. We need this fresh start. I accept the apology, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. And I will stay long enough to complete the data recovery, stabilize the system, hire the new IT staff, and implement the safety protocols we just ordered. I owe the company and the people I work with that much. He nodded, waiting patiently. But after the system is fully operational and the new structure is in place, I continued, meeting his gaze. I'm leaving. The relief drained instantly from his face, replaced by pure shock. What? You have everything you asked for. The power, the pay, the respect. I publicly admitted my failure. I'll bring you Kit Kats every Monday. What more do you want? I want peace of mind, Mr. Henderson, I explained. I got fired over 3 Kit Kats. While you were entirely in the wrong, that paranoia, that toxicity, it's part of the environment here. It's part of you. You signed a contract saying you won't do it again, but this environment is built on fear and anxiety. I just spent the last 2 hours saving you from corporate death, but the reality is I walked out of here the first time and felt freedom. I picked up the signed contract again. You were right when you called me back. This job demands someone who thrives on this kind of chaos. I don't. I thrive on solving clean, logical problems. The ultimate solution to this problem isn't the triple salary or the fancy title. It's realizing my self-worth is higher than any job that can be taken away over a vending machine snack. I slid the contract back toward him. I'm not doing this for leverage. I'm doing this because I can't work for a boss who can become unhinged over a piece of chocolate, regardless of how much he pays me. I need to go build that sourdough starter and play video games without the lingering fear of a list of grievances clipboard. He stared at the contract, then at me. His face softened, finally accepting the true finality of the decision. I understand, he finally said, the words heavy with genuine respect. You know your worth. That's a trait I wish I had cultivated earlier. I stood up, holding the external drive. I'll be in the IT room. I'm working the next 72 hours straight to secure this data. Call me Jake, by the way. No need for the title anymore. As I walked toward the door, he called out, Jake. I paused. Does this mean I don't have to buy the Kit Kats? He asked, a faint, almost shy smile on his face. I chuckled, the first genuine laugh I'd had all day. You know what? Buy them anyway, Mr. Henderson. Donate them to a food bank. It'll be a powerful symbol of your new fiscal discipline. I left his office, not toward a corner office or a new life of corporate power, but toward the IT closet, the dark, cool, logical space where I could do the work needed to save my friends' jobs, and then walk away, truly free. Drop a comment, like, and subscribe if you enjoyed this insane corporate disaster story. The final moments in the office of Mr. Henderson weren't marked by a dramatic walkout or a loud resignation. They were characterized by a quiet, resolved finality. The energy I had used to battle a corrupt system and a tyrannical boss was now channeled into the methodical process of setting things right for the people who remained. I spent the next 72 hours in a sleep-deprived haze, living in the IT closet. Henderson, true to his word, had the industrial-grade UPS systems and the new off-site hardware delivered and installed within 24 hours. He authorized the hiring of 3 senior IT forensic specialists to assist in the deep-level recovery of the full, 10-year Aegis database. My job during those days was supervision and troubleshooting. I worked alongside the specialists, teaching them the specific structural idiosyncrasies of the Aegis database, the very quirks I had learned optimizing it for years. I didn't perform the manual hex sweeps anymore. I focused on building the recovery map and ensuring every salvage sector was validated. I was truly the chief systems architect, the expert guiding the entire operation. On the third day, the full 10-year database was successfully reconstructed and verified, thanks to a combination of my low-level knowledge and the specialist's advanced tooling. The system was now running on the new, massive UPS, backed up locally with a running mirror, and cycling data off-site hourly. The safety net was not just restored, it was exponentially improved. I walked into Henderson's office, carrying a final report on a single sheet of paper. He was reading a financial journal, looking noticeably calmer and more composed than I had ever seen him. The fear that defined his management style seemed to have been replaced by a genuine sense of accountability. "It's done," I announced, placing the report on his desk. "The Aegis database is fully recovered, validated, and secured on the new infrastructure. We're cleaner and safer than we've ever been." He looked up, a genuine, appreciative smile on his face. "Remarkable, Jake. Absolutely remarkable. You delivered." The Cynosure Group auditor signed off on the system this morning. "The contract renewal is guaranteed." He picked up the contract I had left him and slid it back across the desk. "So, the triple salary, the benefits package, the chief architect title, it's all yours. The new IT team reports directly to you. Start today." I picked up the contract, looked at the numbers, the staggering sum that represented financial security for the rest of my life, and then put it back down. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Henderson," I said. And I meant what I said. I will fulfill my promise to stabilize the system, but my last act as an employee of this company will be to formally submit my 2 weeks' notice. Henderson sighed, but there was no anger this time, only a weary understanding. "Still going to go home and try that sourdough starter, I take it?" "And more," I confirmed. I realized something crucial over the past few days. I'm not meant to manage chaos. I'm meant to solve problems that matter to me. I took this job because I needed the money. I'm leaving this job because I learned I need to respect my own professional environment. I leaned in, making eye contact. "The toxicity that led to me being fired over Kit Kats wasn't just your fault. It was a symptom of a culture that values control over people. Even with all the power, money, and respect you've given me, I know that sooner or later, that anxiety will creep back in. I'd rather bet on myself and my skills in an environment of my choosing than stay here and constantly manage your corporate trauma." I pulled out a prepared resignation letter and placed it next to the contract. It was short, professional, and definitive. "I have trained Dan in IT to manage the day-to-day for the next 2 weeks. The new specialists will report to him until you hire a permanent replacement. You have the documentation, the secure system, and the new structure. You don't need me to stay." Henderson picked up the resignation letter, reading it slowly. He put it down and extended his hand across the desk. This time, the handshake was firm, equal, and respectful. "Jake, I'm going to tell you something honest," he said. "I am genuinely disappointed to lose you, but I respect your decision entirely. You are walking away from the biggest contract of your life because you know your own worth. That is the greatest lesson I've learned this week. You came back, saved us, and then left on your own terms. That, sir, is power." He paused, a slight, lingering question in his eyes. "But I have to ask, what are you going to do now? Where does the chief systems architect go?" I smiled, picking up my pathetic little box of desk tchotchkes, the stress ball, the novelty mug, and the now very old petrified bagel. "I'm going to freelance, Mr. Henderson. I'm going to take on impossible, high-stakes forensic recovery jobs for a huge fee, the kind of things I used to read about in those deep IT forums. I know the value of the smash and grab now. I'm going to charge people exactly what my peace of mind is worth." I pointed to the bagel. "And maybe I'll finally conquer the wild, untamed beast that is sourdough." I turned toward the door. As I reached the handle, I stopped and looked back at the transformed, humbled man behind the desk. "Oh, and Mr. Henderson? One last piece of advice. Keep the door to the IT closet unlocked. You never know when you'll need the team or the next generation of soft employees to save your company. I walked out of the office for the final time. The staff looked up as I passed, and this time I wasn't met with pity or shock, but genuine nods of respect. I was leaving the chaos I helped fix, but I wasn't just walking away. I was walking toward the life I decided I deserved. The powerful hook of the story was the sudden return to a firing. The final twist is that I returned, won, and then realized winning the job wasn't the goal. The real victory was realizing I didn't need the job at all. That question about my self-worth, that's the one that lingers. Was I right to walk away from that money? Or would I regret leaving the security and the power? I guess I'll find out when I try to pay rent with a loaf of artisanal bread. Drop a comment, like, and subscribe if you enjoyed this insane corporate disaster story.